First of all, thank you for being here. And if you could do a brief introduction of yourself and present who you are and what are you in charge of in this within this team.
Okay, so my name is Pablo Valdivia. I'm Chair Full Professor of European Culture and Literature. My role in these projects is to coordinate the tasks of the program Result 2, which is related to the creation and implementation of app that will help teachers in the future to improve the design of their courses, and to also tailor-made their courses to the actual needs of their students.
Thank you.
Well, I can follow up on that. So my name is André Roosendaal. I also work at the Faculty of Arts of the University of Groningen. My role is program manager and educational innovation. So I'm involved in various educational projects. I used to work on projects on video, digital testing, virtual reality, etc. And my role until now in the project has been very modest, but I will support Pablo and his team in experimenting with the app and trying to get people involved in using that app and such.
Thank you.
I can follow?
Yes.
Well, my name is María Isabel Marín. I am a PhD student here in the University of Groningen. My role in this PR2 is to support the requirements of the Connect2 app, as I have experience as teacher, but also as software engineer. So that's my role here.
Good afternoon. My name is Hans Belthuis. I work also at the University of Groningen in the strategy department of education and students. And my role in this team is an expert on educational innovation and strategy. And in the educational strategy of the University of Groningen, two important elements are also important for this project, and that is active learning and interdisciplinary education.
Okay, thank you so much. So what is the role of this team within the project, within Innovational Lab? What's the role of RUC team?
Okay, I can help with that. So basically, our job is to use the data that is going to be generated by the project Result 1. And in collaboration with Across Limits, we will help support and co-design the app that will be the final product of the project. So all the colleagues who are here are very important, because as they mentioned before, they have different expertises that are complementary and totally essential for the success of this project. So as Marisabel was explaining, for instance, she's also a software engineer. So for us, this is very important when designing the technicalities of the app together with the colleagues from Across Limits. Then André, as he said, also he is working on PR, all sort of digital related initiatives about education. Also, his role is super important because thanks to him, we will fine tune the app, know if it is actually working with the actual teachers, if they find this useful, how we can make it better and all that. And then Hans, also his role is very important because in his case, he has the institutional knowledge, support and insight to quality in education, which is super important and essential for making sure the final product meets quality standards and is actually useful for our communities.
Okay. In this project in InnovaLab, we're trying to develop, as it's already been said, a tool to help teachers to improve the quality of the classes and the instructional design. So as active professors, what do you think that are the weaknesses or difficulties that teachers have nowadays in developing those activities?
I think this could be a good question for Andrea and Hans.
Yeah, so one of the difficulties is that a lot of information is spread all along the university, or sometimes it's not available in the university. You can find it elsewhere. So it would be very good to have a single point of entry where you can ask your educational challenge or your problem, and find possible solutions for your problem, including what kind of tools you could use, how you can redesign your course, and yeah, facing that challenge and finding a solution. And I think that's what the benefit of this project would be. And another problem that is I think more difficult to solve is the time that teachers have in reading about innovations, about relevant innovation. So also if that would be easier, if they can find their answer faster, that would also be very beneficial.
Well, yeah, I can add only general things, but well, designing a course that involves, of course, careful planning to ensure that learning objectives are effectively met and students are engaged in meaningful learning experiences. And the careful planning can be supported by as Andre said, a single point of entry with an app, and it will save some time for the teachers. But what is also important is that careful planning means also that you use effective methods. And the tool will hopefully support the teachers in applying one of those frameworks or methodologies.
Okay, so on top of that, we've talked about it's important the method that we're using. So I would like to ask you as professor, do you think that using methodologies different than the traditional one, where the professor just appear in front of the teacher and they speak, it's hard to do because of the branch of knowledge or because of the teacher? In the sense that we've heard that in more practical subjects such as engineering or mathematics, it's more easy to do those active methodologies, but in others such as history, which are more or medicine, that are more of studying, are harder. So do you think it's more of the branch of knowledge or the professors who is actually teaching this subject or in the branch of knowledge?
Well, I think it's not so much the branch of knowledge. I think so. Active learning can be implemented in all kinds of in all kinds of fields. It just, yeah, you need to think as a teacher of useful activities where you bring together students, give them an active role in using what I've just studied, either in one-on-one discussions or by creating a presentation, a video recording of themselves, or collaborative work. So and I think, I mean, the history, for example, is a good example where you can give your students an assignment in presenting a certain topic in a more active way than just studying it and go to exam and then you fill out the essay questions. But it's still relevant. But there's so much more possible than only attending a 2-hour lecture. And as I said, so it's, and well, partly it's of course also the well, the quality or the confidence that a teacher has in well, opening a lecture for more discussion, for activities that are not completely streamlined, but can lead to unexpected conversations, discussions, or whatever. So in that sense, it's also a quality of the teacher involved.
Perhaps also I can add to that, and I think also Hans would be interested in sharing his perspective. As Andre was saying, it's not a matter of a subject, but it's a matter of how you understand the creation of knowledge, right? So, for instance, in history, you can have labs where students they have to do challenge-based or case study-based activities in class, where they apply the knowledge that they might have got before in the course of a reading and things like that. Actually, Hans has a lot of experience too on this implementing interactive learning in the University of Groningen in a very successful way. So perhaps Hans can share a little bit more about his experience.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Pablo, for your nice compliment. Well, yeah, what we see is that it is difficult for teachers to see education also as a scientific discipline. I mean, they are really specialists in their physics, in history, or whatever. But making good education actually is also a science. That means that there are really effective and evidence-based methods, frameworks. So what we often say to teachers is that please use your scientific skills not only for your discipline, but also for your education. So see constructing or redesigning your course as a scientific experiment, finding the best methods in order to do the redesign, and importantly also to do an evaluation. Is it successful, yes or no? So you can adapt again for your next course. And what we see in general, but it applies not to all the teachers, I have to say, is that when they see this approach, education is a science, then they see also that education is fun. And that is also really, really important. I mean, when you have fun in your work, then it's much easier to do. That is important. And finally, I think now several years ago at the University of Groningen, as in other universities, we started what is called a Teacher Academy Groningen, in which teachers and educational experts come together to discuss challenges in education. For example, how to implement interdisciplinary education, how to do challenge-based learning, how to make your course more diverse and inclusive. And what you see is that in that type of discussions, actually there is no barrier between the disciplines. Your colleague from history has, for example, really good practice on how to use formative assessment or peer assessment. And as a teacher in the Faculty of Medical Sciences, you can use it also.
That's so interesting. So Hans, continue with you. You've worked a lot on designing the courses to include all your students, which is very related with one of our main topic in this project, with its universal design. So can you explain a little bit more about this? How can we include all our students in our classes?
Well, first of all, actually, I do not do the designing by myself, and we have of educational experts, educational scientists, educational technologists, and sometimes also educational lawyers that do, together with the teacher, the redesign. That is also really important, that as a teacher, you are not alone, you have a whole team. And there is a difference. I'm not sure if I understand your question correctly, but designing a course for 10 students is something else than designing a course for 1,000 students or for 500 students. Is that what you mean?
No, what I meant, it's more like making the class inclusive, because we can have students with disabilities, we can have students that maybe have special needs. So how can we include them all? For example, when we're doing an activity that it's outside the curricular or the traditional class, how can we design that in order to include them all? Or what should we take into account?
Well, again, there is a methodology called design learning you can use, but I am not an expert on this subject, and maybe Pablo or Andre, you can help Alodia in this question.
Well, I was about to mention the universal design for learning as well, but I'm also not an expert. But so, I mean, generally speaking, when you design an assignment, you need to make sure that everyone in your student group and your student population can participate in that assignment, and also make sure that that's an obvious thing, that if you present information, that it's readable by everyone. So you need to take into account the colors that you're using, the font sizes, so that there are various rules for that and tips. Also, if you give 10 examples about certain cases, then not all of them should be about, well, that's an obvious example, white males from the Western world. So you need to also carefully select your examples and your cases, and well, these are a couple of things that I think it starts with being aware of things that you do without thinking as a lecturer, but that for some people indeed mean that it's less that they feel less included as you want them. So awareness is also important there.
So I want to recall back, or you want to say something, Han?
Yeah. So, well, actually, at our university, we have also a special program, and it's called EQUIP, in which teachers are trained in how to use diversity and inclusion in their courses. And there are 3 elements that are really important in this. First is the course design, and you can use the UDL for that. And another one is that if you want to have a course that is inclusive and you want to take advantage of your diversity, you have to pay special attention to what is called group dynamics, in which the students feel safe. So you, as a teacher, you have to pay attention to this in order to have an optimal group dynamic. And the third thing is the role of language. That is, not everybody has, for example, English as the mother tongue. Others have Spanish or Dutch, and you have to take care. You have to take into account the role of language also, and you can do your learning activities in order to take advantage of that.
Okay, so continuing, Pablo, you have a really long career of investigation. Can you tell us about some conclusions that you've reached about curriculum design, inclusive education, lifelong learning, or even if you know about this, what Hans said before, if there's any different with the number of the group, if it's larger or smaller?
Okay, so thank you very much for your question. It's really a pleasure to talk about this. What I have seen, and there is plenty of evidence, so it's not me simply saying this, is that when there is a meaningful social experience that is occurring in the learning process, then basically the learning is better consolidated. And so there's one physical reason for that, is because we use long-term memory instead of short-term memory, right? And that is key in order to produce, as Andre, Marisabel, and Hans were saying before, meaningful learning, right? So in my experience, once you manage to create a meaningful social experience of learning, then learning is happening in a faster path, it's more solid, then the retention is always higher, and there is plenty of evidence of this. Then the number of students in a class, in principle, it should not matter, depending that you have the right facilities and also the right design. Something that was mentioned before by my colleagues is, for instance, backwards design works always very well. So you cannot perhaps use the same strategy with a group of 100 people and a group of 20 people. So, but still active learning works very well with larger groups if there is a constructive alignment between the different elements of the assessment, the learning outcomes, the co-creation of knowledge that is happening in the class. So when all these elements are aligned, then the class becomes more inclusive because it becomes a safe place where students can relate to previous experiences and things like that. Also, in that regard, something that in my own practice is very important is I never depart from the point of view that the students, they know nothing about a particular subject. They'll have experiences that can be related to what they are going to study. So, for instance, if the students are studying physics, perhaps they don't know by heart the equation of a particular force, but they are experiencing every day these forces in their daily lives. The same happens with, for instance, culture and literature. They might not know, and Marisabel is a great expert on this, they might not know that they are using metaphors all the time. But actually, these metaphors are shaping the way they feel, the way they relate to each other, the way they make sense of time, they make sense of their own lives. And perhaps they don't know that this is something called analogical modeling, that this is related to the notion of extended metaphor theory. But if you appeal to these, let's say, pre-existent experiences they have, they can be activated better in this learning process. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you so much. So keeping going, Andre, you work on educational support, as you actually explained before. So how do you envision the future of educational support?
Well, let me start with saying that educational support has been around, well, for a very long time. I personally worked there for like 30 years, and it's also, well, partly related to the use of IT and computers in education, and so people needed support for that, to have artificial means, etc. So it has been around very long, and so one of the task of a teaching support team, or a center for teaching and learning, as they seem to be called nowadays, is to form like a bridge between the lecturers, the academic staff, and the people from the management, the faculty boards, the university boards, etc. And I think that especially, well, since COVID, when every institution needs to make the transition between on location, well, except for those giving online education only, but every institution had to make the transition between on location to on-site education, and I think that the educational support teams were key in that transition, because, well, they could help lecturers in redesigning their courses to use equipment for online teaching, for online meeting. We also had the AV, the audiovisual experts, etc. So I think that since then the role of educational support teams has become more visible, and more people realize the importance of having good educational support. So in that sense, I think the appreciation has risen, and in that sense the future is bright. Also, with respect to the Netherlands, so there is a national initiative to fund every institution to either set up a CTL, so a Center for Teaching and Learning, if they don't have it already, or to bring it to a higher level, because many institutions already have these centers. So also in that regard, there is funding, extra funding, and so, well, you can expect that at least in the Netherlands, so the level of support will increase. On the other end, education often has to do with budget costs. So the main pillars of a university are education and research, and of course there's also a chance that budget costs affect the number of people working in this support teams, and that would also be a possible decrease of the level of support that we can give. So that's in my view, working for such a CTL, it remains important to make yourself visible, to be proactive, to go to lectures, explain them what you're doing, how you can be of help, how you can support them, and also to work together within the university and also outside the borders of your own institution and even country. So having national and international communities.
Hans, that you've raised your hand.
Yeah, well, yeah, of course I agree with Andre. Maybe the lessons we have learned from the COVID pandemic are actually three. The first one is that the continuous professional development of teachers is really important. That means you should also give them time. You should also recognize and reward those activities. The second one is that teacher support is crucial. That is what we have discussed until now. And the other one is also that besides the more didactical perspective, also the infrastructural perspective of education is important. You can imagine that if you are in a theater for a lecture of 500 students in which there actually is no flexibility at all, that is quite different to a classroom in which everything is flexible. So that is what we call active learning classrooms. So this third aspect, the infrastructural aspect of education, has also got some attention too.
Okay, thank you so much. I think it's really important and really useful what you're saying. So, Maria Isabel, you're creating a more inclusive learning community. You know that creating a more inclusive learning community is always challenging. So what are your recommendations for those teachers who are really struggling with diversity in the classroom?
Well, I think that it is good that we have some methodologies that can help us to deal with this, like universal designs. But I will say that there is a word that is very important that Andre mentioned it before, that is awareness. And I think that is very important that we can be aware that an inclusive learning environment is about ensuring every student has equal learning opportunities, and that there are different types of diversity, cultural backgrounds, gender, learning styles, language proficiencies. And it's important that we can be aware of this, and that also that working on this matter is not only not help us only to enrich students' learning experiences, but also help us to improve our own professional development, right? And I will say that it will be good to starting reflecting on our personal biases, just to ask ourselves, what could be the biases that I still have from the culture, and to reflect on what is the potential impact that this can have in our teaching practices. And that is a good starting point. And also to encourage student voice and agency, so they can feel confident about sharing their unique experiences and perspectives. So I think that this, and also keeping a proactive commitment with this matter, is very recommended in the classroom.
Thank you so much. So finally, and for concluding a little bit the interview, I would like to know what are your expectations, or what do you hope to achieve with the development of this InnovaLab project, with this innovational lab that we are creating and the app that we are designing?
Well, from my perspective, what it would be ideal is that we kind of institutionalize even more all the efforts that Marie-Isabel, Andre, and Hans have provided, and the insights they have provided here in this interview. So, for instance, what they said about awareness, what they said about understanding the need for investing into teaching professionalization, in quality, in education, flexibility. I think that is what this Innova Lab plus the app can further contribute to, and especially regarding the app. Let's say my dream would be that perhaps colleagues that they don't have the great support we have here that is provided by Hans and Andre, right? So they are great at providing us with great support about not only tools, but also critical perspectives on education, training us and all that. So perhaps in other universities, they don't have the luck we have of having the support of people like Hans and Andre, and so then, they need these supports, right? And I think this app somehow can provide that support that is perhaps missing in other institutions, and it's very much helpful when you have to make your decision about how I'm going to design a course, what are the most convenient activities, which tools, what is working, what is not working, and so on and so forth. And I think in that sense, this team that I'm particularly proud of, together with Marisabel, that she's great about bringing all this awareness and how technical part and all that, we can manage to produce something that will be very useful for colleagues, not only here in the Netherlands, but all over the world.
Okay, thank you so much for your time and for doing this interview with me. And I hope that we can really reach good results with this project.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank
Going to
you,
stop there.
Valeria.